An evidence-based approach to COVID-19 vaccination. Authors, Vinay Prasad and Martin A. McCary, MD. And, Prasad is one of the people in this administration who's behind this horrible thing that the FDA came out with. So here's the in the New England Journal of Medicine. Over the past 5 years, the United States have moved towards an annual COVID-19 booster program. Each fall, COVID-19 booster shots are developed alongside seasonal influenza vaccines and are recommended for every American. As compared with vaccination policies in all European nations, U.S. policy has been the most aggressive, while all other high-income nations confine vaccine recommendations to older adults. I have no reason to believe you, by the way, or these high risk for COVID-19. The United States have adopted a one-size-fits-all regulatory framework. The U.S. policy has sometimes been justified by arguing that Americans are not sophisticated enough to understand age and risk-based recommendations. We reject this view. You had a ton of Americans who voted for Donald Trump as president. I affirm that view. Plenty of Americans are too dumb to know what the hell they're doing. Although rapid development of multiple COVID-19 vaccine in 2020 represents a major scientific, medical, and regulatory accomplishment, the benefit of repeat dosing, particularly among low-risk persons who may have previously received multiple doses of COVID-19 vaccines, as multiple COVID infections or both, is uncertain, yada, yada, yada. Over the past 2 seasons, the uptake of the annual COVID-19 booster has been poor, blah, blah, blah. Moving forward, the FDA will adopt following COVID-19 vaccination regulatory framework on the basis of immunogenicity or whatever, proof that a vaccine can generate the antibody titers in people. The FDA anticipates that it will be able to make favorable benefit risk findings for adults over the age of 65 and for all persons above the age of 6 months with one or more risk factors that put them in high risk for severe COVID-19 outcomes, as described by the CDC. For all healthy persons, those with no risk factors for severe COVID-19 between the ages of 6 and 64, the FDA anticipates the need for randomized controlled trial data evaluating clinical outcomes before biologics license applications can be granted. Insofar as possible in approving a COVID-19 vaccine for higher risk groups, the FDA will encourage manufacturers to conduct randomized controlled trials. So basically, they're going to make the big pharmaceuticals. I mean, I'm not a big fan of big pharma. Don't get me wrong on that. But they're basically saying that they're now going to have to make more trials done to test the efficacy and safety of these vaccines that have already been proven to be efficacious and safe. This is going to cause more people to die. Because what about the people who are immunocompromised, who can't take a vaccine, and who rely on the herd immunity of others? What they should do, if they really wanted a science-based approach, what they should do is do a trial on the people who have been vaccinated and who have had maybe multiple COVID-19 infections or what have you, and check to see if they are still protected from those vaccines. You know, we take the flu shot every year, and they adjust the flu shot based on the strains of the flu that seem to be prevalent in the areas. Why would we not do the same for COVID? Of course, I fully expect them to do the same thing for the flu vaccine as well, because RFK Jr. is a shithead who doesn't quite understand, how health works. And he admits so because he says he's not somebody that we should be listening to when it comes to health advice for anything. But who is this man? Who is this person, Vinay Prasad? And why should we listen to him? Or why do you think I have a problem with trusting anything that he has to say? So he has a YouTube channel. And here is just one video I picked solely on the title. RFK cuts HHS, NIH cuts grants. Are they available? Peter Marks and more. So let's see what this individual has
Welcome
to
back
say.
to the channel. The media
Welcome back to the channel. I mean, it does have a voice for radio, so there you go for that.
has been getting a number of the health and science news stories around the Trump administration all wrong. And of course, it's natural that they would do that.
Of course the media is getting them all wrong because, why are they?
They rely on experts who didn't vote for Trump, don't like Trump, and will do anything for Trump to fail. They want Trump to fail.
Here's the thing. It's a very bold assertion that he's making here, that the third part of that They may very well have never voted for Trump because, if they actually believe in science and facts and logic and reason, they would look at Donald Trump and be like, this person has no business being president whatsoever. So yeah, clearly they're going to have disdain for him. But to suggest these people are going to risk their careers and make poor judgments and incorrect medical statements simply because they don't like Trump, no, they're not MAGA. They're not you. Every conservative accusation, though, it ends up being a confession because he believes that they're doing that because that's what they do. That's what they do. The conservatives do.
And so they're asking these experts what they think about what Trump's doing, and they're giving a skewed perspective. Now, the media could ask experts who support some of the policies or ask for a more thoughtful and nuanced view of the issue, but they choose not to do that. So I just want to...
Sometimes this person is wrong, boneheaded, a dullard, and has no idea about science, i.e. Donald Trump. Sometimes that's all you need to say. But sure, maybe he wants things worded something else because words hurt.
I want to give you a couple examples of where that's happening. Number one, layoffs. Now, first of all, my heart goes...
This isn't a health issue. I mean, you could make it into a health issue, but, this is the media talking about the layoffs incorrectly. How are they doing that?
It's out to anyone who lost their job. We all know that's a situation nobody wants to be in. We don't like it when it happens in our family. We don't like it to happen to a friend of ours. But the reality is, in America, people get laid off from time to time.
Yes, they do. But a lot of times people who get laid off can, mostly anticipate that happening. Or, there'll be a good reason for it to be done. The people that have been laid off under this administration are like air traffic controllers. We've seen problems in air traffic control. People who are responsible for watching over our nuclear arsenal, they got laid off. Lots of other people got laid off who either they needed to scramble to go rehire again or are filling services or were filling services that where the impact might not be hit yet, but it's still going to cause a lack of services being provided by the government that's supposed to be providing said services.
If you work at Google or Facebook or any of these big companies, there are often 5 or 10% cuts in staffing. Now, are all the people laid off bad people? No, naturally some of those people are good people too.
Nobody was suggesting that they were being laid off for being bad people. Why are you bringing that up?
But it's done so that the organization can be leaner, so it can function better, and
leaner doesn't necessarily mean function better. I mean, you as a doctor should know that if you get too lean, that's called anorexia. And you're not going to function at all if you are too anorexic and get too skinny because you're not taking in enough nutrients to, because that may be something you might be able to understand. Same thing is true for any business or any organization working as a business or even any governmental organization whatsoever, any department of government. If you make it too lean, you're going to end up failing your mission. But I mean, that's probably a feature, not a bug, to the MAGA-type conservatives. Let's continue.
Nobody calls that a bloodbath. Nobody says a generation of Facebook is over. They often look back on it and say that was a smart structural move to improve the margins of the company.
I don't know how many people that I've never heard anybody talking about the layoffs that were done at private companies and be like, oh, that was a smart thing that they did, laying off those people, blah, blah, blah. I mean, mostly, usually we'll be like, it's greed that's doing it or something. Or, when Musk did it at Twitter, we were like, oh, the product's going to go downhill because you're not going to have as many, people supporting the software. So it'll go and basically turn into a giant cesspool of scum and villainy. And that's what happened because he allowed it to happen. But,
But when it comes to government, that's not the rhetoric people use.
Because government's different than a private business. Despite the fact that conservatives say that government should be run like a business, no, it shouldn't. Look at how Donald Trump ran his businesses into the ground to gain personal wealth, to understand why government shouldn't always be run like a business. Like, for example, when Louisiana had the Department of Health run by Bobby Jindal, who later became governor of Louisiana, he turned a deficit, a $200 million deficit, to a $20 million surplus. Why didn't he spend that money? Businesses want to get profits. It's not the job of the Louisiana Department of Health to, have profits. It needs to be spending the money that it gets on providing health care for the individuals that they're supposed to be providing health care to. Let's continue.
Every sort of layoff is a bloodbath. A generation of scientists are lost. This is empty rhetoric. It's no such thing. On the screen,
So says the person who is the brown noser of the orange, I should say orange noser because of Donald Trump's hue of this president. I mean, if you're going to sit here brown nosing the president and gaslighting the rest of us, sure, you're going to disagree with everything in the media that is said about your hero.
I'm going to show you a figure.
For over 17 years, I thought that I had a
show you a
problem with
figure.
this, but I actually didn't. It wasn't this that caused
That I had to ask around to get. This is what no media story has in it. This is from a Cato Institute publication, and this is the number of people who work at HHS over time. And what you can see is it went up from, in 1996, 55,000 to over 80,000 in Biden. Now, what does this mean? It means that all of the
What is it? I'm waiting for this one.
The articles talking about a 10% cut to HHS should acknowledge the fact that we're really returning to Obama-level staffing. We're not even going back to Bush.
Going back to Obama-level staffing, but what's the evidence that we can afford to go back to Obama-level staffing? We're not done with COVID. You know, COVID is still a thing. At least one person in our chat caught it recently. COVID is a thing. And there are other health effects and other issues in government altogether where, reducing staffing levels below what we need is going to be harmful and prevent those people to do what they need to do. Right? I mean, I'm sure if we looked at a graph of, people who are in the military and compare it, certain times and certain years, there are certain times where we need more people in the military, because we were at war. And then there are other times where we needed fewer people in the military because we were not at war. But there are also other things that the people in the military could do. So you have to determine based on the existing what things are now, what they're like now, to determine what your staffing needs are now. You can't just say, well, Obama had this low level, so why can't we do it here? Show me why we can go back to Obama levels and I'll agree. But they have not yet to do so. That's because DOJ doesn't, in their efficiency, they've decided to just not tell us any information.
So, is it really so catastrophic? I find it hard to believe. And everyone who's ever worked in government or interacted with government knows it is full of bureaucratic processes that don't make any sense.
And a lot of times private businesses are full of, waste that takes place in the form of profit where, this is funds that potentially could go to higher employee pay, but go instead to the big wigs there. So, and sometimes bureaucracies are good. Like if there was more bureaucracy in, the deportation process, and they actually had people doing, checks to make sure whether or not their actions are good and legal or not, or they're deporting the right people. Maybe if you had more people working on those things, you'd get it right. But instead, he just has everybody focusing on deporting and nobody focusing on making sure they get it right because they don't care if they get it right as it pertains to people who are not white.
And it very likely can undergo a haircut and still function, perhaps even function better, because some people are making
a haircut. Blind cuts are not... Elon Musk even bragged himself by waving a chainsaw around on stage that he was admitting that these were cuts that were done blindly. They were not done in a measured approach. They did not look at the hair and give a haircut and make sure that the hair was cut evenly and properly. They just basically took a weed whacker to the hair and be like, oh, well, who cares if I cut your scalp? Who cares if I got rid of half your hair? Who cares if the haircut looks nice or not? We gave you a haircut, so good, right? No. Let's continue.
Making work for other people to do to justify their own existence. The next topic. The next thing I think we have complete and total dishonesty about from the media is the NIH grant cuts. I see there are even profiles of individuals who say my grant was cut. Side note, I saw somebody who lost a grant for a book that they were writing through the National Endowments for Humanities or something. I looked up the title of the book. The title of the book is The Racialization of Print.
So they got the grant. They should be awarded the grant, and they should get the money from the grant.
Of course that's going to get cut. I don't understand how government can...
Well, of course it's going to get cut, but you probably, because this is the Trump administration, and of course the Trump administration is going to want to nix anything or 86 anything that pertains to, anything about race, because they don't want people educated or informed about how race has, effects all over our economy, all over our nation, society, etc.
Can fund it in the first place. You're telling me we're going to tax plumbers and bus drivers and lunch ladies in school so that someone else can write an extremely left-wing book about the...
What percentage of those tax dollars? And, you're taxing those same people to fund tax cuts for billionaires. You're taxing those same people to pay to refurbish a plane that you just accepted from the country of Qatar. You're using those tax dollars to pay for security so that Donald Trump can go golfing. You don't say a peep about that. That's not fraud, waste, and abuse to conservatives. That's A-okay to them. But God forbid somebody get a little bit of money to write a book to explain how, media and race come together, which to me, when I hear the title of the book, it sounds to me looking at race through the lens of the media and doing an investigation on that. It's probably something that most conservatives should need to read. I mean, it's not as a coloring book, so they probably won't be able to comprehend anything. If it's not mostly pictures, they're probably doomed. They might need the audiobook, and even then they might not be able to understand some of the concepts because, as we all know, after 2016 Nevada primaries, Donald Trump said he loved the poorly educated, and the MAGA types are constantly trying to prove themselves worthy of that love to this day.
The racialization of print. And not only is it a left-wing book, obviously from the title and the content, but it's a book that no one's going to even want to read. I mean,
I might read it. I guess we'll never know now.
If you wouldn't even be able to sell such a book because nobody wants to read that book. Listen.
That's another problem with conservatism today. That a book wouldn't sell is a reason to not publish the book. Especially on issues like this, like racialization in print or whatever. For issues like this might be a good book to have in libraries. Like libraries might want to have this as a resource or a reference so that individuals who are doing, academic research on such topics could be like, oh, here's a book on this topic I want. Let's incorporate what this person says into my thesis. Because sometimes it's good to have books to educate people and to give diverse opinions about certain subjects. Earlier on in this damn video, he complained that only certain people are being asked by the media about Donald Trump and his cuts or whatever. But now he's saying that he doesn't want to hear diverse views. Earlier, he wants diverse views to defend Donald, but he rejects diverse views on other topics. Hypocrisy is a conservative prerequisite. If we didn't already have a hypocrite of the week, he might very well qualify as such. Let's continue.
And I'm the author of 2 academic books. I know how hard it is to get someone to read a book.
Are they coloring books too? And as I didn't watch this video, I had no idea that he wrote 2 academic books. He should know that there are reasons to write books that are beyond just making a profit.
If I wrote a book called The Racialization of Print, it would fare even worse than Ending Medical Reversal, which wasn't exactly a bestseller. You have to have some sense. The government shouldn't subsidize.
We might have to look that up, Ending Medical Reversal, and see what that is about, because I'm sure it's lovely.
Subsidize these ridiculous pieces of writing, and taxing regular people to pay for it makes no sense at all. And it certainly doesn't make sense when
taxing regular people to do things that I don't like to do. Well, you tax everybody partially to do things that they don't agree with. I don't want my tax dollars going to refurbish a plane that is a grift to Donald Trump. I don't want my tax dollars going to fund hotel stays for people in our administration if they could get cheaper deals somewhere else, because that money they want, but they're pushing the people to those Trump hotels so the Trump administration or the Trump organization can get profit from our tax dollars. I don't want my tax dollars going to Ashley Babbitt's family. Sometimes we don't have a say about how our tax dollars are spent. Let's continue.
More Americans overwhelmingly don't like these kinds of DEI concepts.
DEI concepts. I want him to define DEI and then explain which part of diversity, equity, or inclusion he is against and why. Let's see, Leanna, did we pay for that plane for him? We didn't pay for the, well, I mean, I'm sure there was some quid pro quo there, but we are going to have to pay to refurbish the plane to give it to the standards that we would want to have an Air Force One plane to have. I couldn't care less if Trump's Air Force One didn't have everything that it needed. If he wants to fly in it day one, go right ahead, have fun. But it shouldn't be, we shouldn't have to waste our tax dollars on refurbishing a plane when we're supposed to have two coming down the pipe. Let's continue.
They don't like it. That's why they voted for Trump, because they're sick of this. So I actually have a copy from Appendix 3, language provided to NIH by HHS for what to cut funding on. I'm going to read you some of the language, and you decide for yourself if this is good cuts or bad cuts.
Again, that's the overly simplistic kindergarten view of how to judge things. Does it mention a word? Then get rid of it. We've lost several examples of the picture of the Enola Gay had to be taken down because it had the word gay in it, despite the fact it had nothing to do with homosexuality, and it was part of our history that should be maintained in the historical records of our nation. Let's hear these words that he is so offended by, I guess.
Topic 1, China. It says, quote, bolstering Chinese universities does not enhance the American people's quality of life or improve Americans' position in the world. On the contrary, funding research in China contravenes national security interests and hinders foreign policy objectives. Of course that's true. What, are we supposed to subsidize China too? Aren't they the rival? Aren't they our potential rival?
Well, he kisses his ass every time he can, despite talking badly about China as a whole. He loves talking about President Xi and how wonderful he is. So,
on the global stage. And had we not funded China research in the first place, we might not have had the pandemic because we're funding those ridiculous outsourced experiments on coronavirus.
Bold.
Great ideas can come.
Let's just not hear the commercial.
DEI. Quote, research programs based primarily on artificial and non-scientific categories, including amorphous equity objectives, are antithetical to scientific inquiry, do nothing to expand our knowledge of living systems, provide low return on investment, and do not enhance health, lengthen life, or reduce illness. Worse, so-called DEI studies are often used to support unlawful discrimination since race and other protected characteristics. Since race is one of the protected characteristics which harms the health of Americans, therefore it is the policy of NIH to not prioritize such research programs.
Okay, you said all that stuff. And they said all the things about why DEI is not a thing that they want to fund. But do they prove their argument that they make? Or are you just accepting the argument that they're making as correct without any underlying proof? I mean, you're supposed to be a doctor. You're supposed to understand the scientific method. Yet you're just going to believe what the administration tells you when it comes to why these things shouldn't be funded, when you already know that they're biased against these things because they don't like them. Again, hypocrisy, because earlier on he didn't like the fact that people who dislike this president are giving information as to why the president is wrong. Well, why aren't you calling for other people from the other side to be able to say why DEI funding is important, why DEI funding is necessary, the positive benefits that you have by diversity, equity, and inclusion. But you don't have that here. You're just blindly following the naysayers of DEI without listening to anybody on the other side. So again, you're a frickin' hypocrite. Why would I believe you on anything else?
That seems reasonable to me too. We had a study
Of course it seems reasonable to you because you're a Donald Trump bootlicker orange noser.
Years ago about how if a black doctor takes care of a black neonate, the death rate is half that a white doctor taking care of a black neonate. When I read that study, I found it preposterous. There's nothing in medicine that has an effect size of 50%. So there's some coding error. When I looked at it more, I saw that attribution between baby and doctor was really crappy. When it was reanalyzed, they found that the effect vanished when you adjusted for birth weight, but it probably has still even other errors.
They found that the effect changed when you adjusted for birth weight. But I'm not a doctor. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night either. But if you have black babies with black physicians doing better than with a white physician. And you're then saying that weight factors offset it. So you're saying there are issues pertaining to the weight of the children that helped offset those things. But here's the kicker. You're not willing to look at the fact that maybe there is a racial component to why, or there is there or not a racial component as to why you have these weight discrepancies amongst the black children who are receiving the care. And maybe that is having to do with their race, or because their race, they're disproportionately, more likely to have poor diets, because they're disproportionately likely to have to, have less money to spend on food, so that you have to get processed and other manufactured stuff that it has lots of, nitrites and other things that are, not necessarily the best, when you would obviously prefer people to have organically grown fresh vegetables and fruits and other stuff like that, and not processed meat and stuff like that. Poverty can affect your neonatal or your postnatal weight. Poverty affects health, because poverty makes you more likely to, or less likely to be able to get the food that you need, or to be able to get the health care that you need, or be able to take time off to get the health care that you need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And black people in this country are disproportionately poor as compared to white people. As looking at the percentage of the amount of people in this country that are black versus the amount of people that are white, poverty is a problem more so in the black community than it is in other areas, because this country has a system, or has had a system of, for centuries, of racism against these black people. And you don't think that any discussions of race are helpful at all? You don't think that looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion could potentially help us to understand why people in marginalized and oppressed groups are not getting the health expectations that we would expect from the society as a whole? And you're supposed to be a doctor, and you can't understand these very simple facts that I can understand, and I'm not a doctor? Because you're a bootlicker before anything else. You should lose anybody who puts support of a politician, or even opposition of a politician, above their desire to, do medicine, should lose their medical license. Because he is proving right now that he has no interest in actual facts. He just wants to bootlick and gaslight. Let's continue.
In it. Meanwhile, Ketanji Brown Jackson has included it as a reference in a Supreme Court case. What's my point? Low credibility DEI research is harmful to the American narrative.
Low quality might be harmful, because if it's low quality, it's not giving the information. But maybe we need more high quality DEI education, so you and other people like you can understand why we need to understand these things.
Narrative of who we are. It's harmful to the truth. It makes people think that if they have a white doctor, the baby is twice as likely to die. That's just not true.
That's not what it's saying. But yes, there are circumstances where black doctors are more likely to listen to maybe black women, especially black women doctors. When I was driving Uber one time, I had a conversation with this wonderfully gifted person who was both going for become a medical doctor and wanted a degree in public health, so that she could advocate and implement programs that will enable the inner city folks to be able to get people who look like them and who understand where they come from to maybe have a better understanding of what's coming from these people and why they might be more prone to being unhealthy because of their poverty, because of all the other issues. But, hey, he thinks it's harmful to understand that. When in reality, what she was saying, which is true, is that if, a lot of times people don't listen to women specifically when they talk about the pain. There was just something that was released the other day, I think, some journal of medicine basically was now finally encouraging numbing agents be used, not just externally, but numbing agents be used when you insert an IUD. Because women for a very long time have complained about the discomfort that takes place when they're getting the IUD inserted, and they're just like, oh, whatever, grin and bear it, blah, 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 just take it. You're hysterical or whatever, and they're just not going to believe the women, because medicine had been, at least doctors had been, a male-dominated field for a very long time. So that's why a lot of people feel more comfortable with, if you're getting, if you need an OBGYN, that's why a lot of women are more comfortable with a woman doctor. Same thing can be said about black women. And the problem is, in that same study, I believe, I don't remember the exact numbers, but black women are even less likely to be believed when it comes to them talking about pain. I know somebody who is racially mixed, but she's been dealing with chronic pain for a very long time. And one of the things that she told me the other day was that the notes that were put into her chart was that they believed that she was there just seeking out pain pills. Maybe if she was not a minority, she would have been more likely to be believed and less likely to be assumed that, oh, she's just coming in here. No, she strained her frickin' groin and, months earlier broke her frickin' hip. Yeah, she's going to be in pain. And yeah, you should give her stuff to help deal with the pain. Don't just look at her and be like, oh, that's just somebody who's trying to get drugs. Screw you. This is why people might have better outcomes when it comes to their health by seeing a doctor who is more like them, because that doctor is more like them might have actually dealt with the same issues, and as such might be more likely to listen to those issues, whereas somebody else might be like, psh, whatever. Let's continue.
And it's a harmful and, I would say, bigoted view to offer that based on low credibility science. And of course, it should be defunded.
Low credibility science. I think what you're providing is low credibility science, especially if you don't think that people who are, above the age of 6 should be now getting access to, or losing their access to COVID-19 vaccines, because that's what the FDA is doing.
Gendered issues. Research programs based on gender identity, often unscientific, have little identifiable return on investment, do nothing to enhance the health.
Limited return on investment. Again, you're looking at something strictly by the fact that, can it make a bunch of money? Who cares if it could make a bunch of money in the retail world? Yeah, there are a lot of academic textbooks that would not make a lot of money, but it still might be necessary to have, journals of these articles and other books, references that people can look up. So if they're researching these things, they can have multiple references. Again, you wanted multiple references, yet you're going to deny the ability of people who you happen to disagree with the ability to put out those references out there, because you only want information that follows your worldview and your worldview alone. That's not science. Not at all. As a scientist, you should be somebody who should want your worldview challenged constantly. You should welcome the constant challenging of the worldview to make sure that people who are coming up with potentially valid theories to see whether or not they're valid or not. And if they're not valid, fine, cool. But the research still needs to be done, because you don't get advancements without getting the research. And many times the things you want to research aren't sexy. There aren't something that you could put a nice cover on and sell it. But it's still necessary to advance the knowledge of this country. But Donald Trump did say, again, that he loves the poorly educated after the 2016 Nevada primaries. So he wants to have a dumbed-down electorate, a dumbed-down populace, so that people won't just question you when you say things like the garbage that is being spewed in this video. Let's continue.
Of many Americans, many studies ignore rather than seriously examine biologic realities. We found out in the New York Times just a few months ago that there's a researcher who conducted a transgendered study that didn't...
Transgender study, not transgendered. Get the words right if you're going to be critical of them.
Give her the answer she wanted about, I think, regret, and she has chosen to suppress those findings and not publish it. This was asked to Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH.
Okay. So why, if somebody believes that they want to have write a thesis and make a paper and do some research, and they found that their hypothesis was not founded, why would they want that published? Why would they want it? I mean, I understand, your Supreme Court people love to look at their own dissents to make arguments in their next dissents because they want to, gaze at their own belly buttons or whatever. But if I don't want to be discredited to somebody, I don't want to publish something that goes against my thesis, I'm going to be like, oh, well, I wrote this thing, I had this idea, it turns out that won't be right, so let's go ahead and circle back and try and figure out, where I got this wrong, or where my thesis was wrong, so we can go back and, do some more research. Why would you not want it out? Why would you want it out, I mean?
Senate confirmation. The public paid for
Easy E over there. Yeah, this guy is not a good scientist. Clearly not.
that research. It should be funded. Transgender research can
Transgender research.
be done, I think, in a thoughtful way, but it has to be done by people who are scientists and not activists. And
But see, you're going to view anybody who's trying to go against what you think are biological realities as activists, regardless of whether or not they're actually performing scientific studies on the topics or not. That's the problem. At least that's the perception of you that I am taking from this guy right now, is that he would be opposed to those people making such, academic research, projects or whatever. And he would say that those people must be activists if they're pushing for it, and therefore it's not science.
frankly, I don't see a lot of them in that space. If you have a researcher who won't publish findings that disagree with her conclusion, that's not a researcher who should ever receive federal funding. Full stop.
Because every single research project that is funded by the NIH always comes up with a positive, proof that what they were hypothesizing, what thesis that they had was, they're always right 100% of the time. No, that's not going to happen. Sometimes you do research and find out that your immediate stance, the initial stance that you had, is wrong. So you go back to the drawing board and you go figure out where you got it wrong again. But no, according to this guy, what? You only publish you publish everything that comes out because everything must be right? No, it's stupid.
And I do think it would be reasonable to not fund this research until people figure out how to do it right or not do it at all. And we actually have a sort of a meta research paper in this space that's percolating, maybe eventually published. But it
Are you now? I'm sure it's going to be quality.
also points out that the quality of the evidence in the space is very poor, which is actually the conclusion of the UK CAS report, which is something that people don't want to accept. But of course, the quality of the evidence is extremely poor, and transgendered issues research
Transgender issues.
programs simply try to cater to a narrative rather than answer fundamental questions. Vaccine hesitancy. Quote, it is the policy of the NIH not to prioritize research activities that focus on gaining knowledge as to why individuals are hesitant to be vaccinated and explore ways to improve vaccine interest and commitment. Now, here's a tricky one. I think it is important to understand why people don't want to be vaccinated, but I do agree that it should be defunded for now, and here's why.
Measles, you dumb fuck. Measles is problematic in this country. We have an issue, an epidemic of measles. Measles is spreading. Why? Because of vaccine hesitancy. Because you idiots, MAGA as a whole, conservatism as a whole, fought vaccines and said, oh, they're dangerous. They're going to put 5G in your arm. They're going to, they're going to change your DNA and turn you into a different person altogether, or whatever bullshit they said. And this caused people to not just doubt the COVID vaccine, but other vaccines like MMR. So abso-frickin-lutely, you need to continue to fund research onto why people are hesitant to take things like the MMR vaccine, to fix that and make sure that people aren't being fucking idiots. I guess you can't stop an idiot from being an idiot, right?
Because I'm not convinced that anyone working in this space is doing it honestly.
I'm not convinced that you're being honest right here. What would be even, see, that's the thing. Either this person knows what he's saying is bullshit, but is being dishonest when it comes to what he's saying because he's pushing his own agenda, or Trump's agenda, or MAGA's agenda, or Project 2025's agenda, which lots of combinations between the two, right? So either it's that he's knowingly and willfully misleading other people, or what's worse is that he's in a position of power in the government and he really believes this shit.
Everyone wants to say, oh, the reason people are hesitant to be vaccinated is RFK Jr. and Joe Rogan and all those folks on the right.
Yeah. They're helping to perpetuate that bullshit. So we're going to point out that they're perpetuating the bullshit.
What about the fact that Peter Marks approved a booster for a 6-month-old baby year after year after year without any randomized data. Wait a second. The CDC said if your baby just had COVID, your 8-year-old had COVID, they still need a COVID shot? Really? Really? And they mandated it for me at work, but I got COVID at work because I'm working in the healthcare and I didn't want to get the shot. Now they fired me. Those are anti-vaccine actions.
What? So what? Let's listen to that last part again because it was nonsensical to me.
COVID, your 8-year-old had COVID, they still need a COVID shot? Really? Really? And they mandated it for me at work, but I got COVID at work because I'm working in the healthcare and I didn't want to get the shot. Now they fired me. Those are anti-vaccine actions.
Well, yeah, it's not anti-vaccine actions, it's anti-idiot actions because you don't want people working in the healthcare field who reject basic healthcare principles. And if you're not willing to take the jab, as they call it, if you're unwilling to take the jab because you're scared, because maybe we need to figure out why that person was scared, why that person was made to believe that it was more dangerous for them to take the vaccine than it was for them to get vaccinated. But information has shown that after the vaccine was pushed out, that the highest rate of deaths were in the unvaccinated areas and not the vaccinated ones. Because the places where people were dying more during the beginning parts of the pandemic, because Jared Kushner et al. Had no problem with black people dying. He viewed that as a feature, not a bug. But once black neighborhoods got access to the COVID vaccine, death rates in the black neighborhoods went down, and where the death rates kept high were the non-vaccinated neighborhoods. Get this guy.
Those poisonous, debilitating actions are anti-vaccine actions. These researchers are not including them in the panoply of things that may be causing hesitancy. So as such,
So somebody is hesitant to take a vaccine and was fired because they didn't take the vaccine, and that makes them less likely to get the vaccine, even though they did get COVID. Make that make sense. I don't think he'll be able to, but there's no way that makes sense in any sort of logical way. But they just like to throw shit at the wall and see if it sticks.
You're not willing to have an open mind about what might be the root
or ketchup
of hesitancy, and also to acknowledge that sometimes hesitancy is a good thing, because I'm not...
Sometimes, hesitancy to take MMR is a good thing. No. Sometimes, being cautious, yes, is a good thing. You should ask questions if you want, if you have concerns. But there's a certain point where you have to listen to the plurality of health experts that say that quacks like these are idiots. My opinion.
Getting any more boosters for COVID ever, and that's a good hesitancy. It's protecting me from the stupidity of public health experts.
Stupidity of public health experts. Again, every conservative accusation ends up being a confession.
And regulators. Sometimes hesitancy be good. So all these things have to be factored into a proper research program, and until they do so, they have no ability to do.
Let's look at the unscientific things and include them in a scientific program.
Do so right now. COVID, the end of the pandemic, caused us to terminate COVID-related grants. Yeah, it should be terminated. I saw somebody saying that I'm working on a new antiviral for COVID and my grant was terminated, and they were like,
why shouldn't you be able to continue to work on antiviral? Maybe someone might be able to come up with an even better one. But no, we don't want that. What? Let's continue.
Like, oh, that's so boo-hoo-hoo, my grant. What about the next plague? Well, if you want to study antivirals for a future plague, let's do that. But that's not your grant.
Oh, no, let's not do that, because y'all say that we shouldn't be looking at future plague and future pandemic issues. Because you apparently believe that they were studying COVID-19. They created it in the lab or whatever to study the virus or whatever. They believe that. But now he says it's okay to go do research on future things. The Trump administration nixed the Obama administration's pandemic response team or whatever that was created to help us be able to react to pandemics more. Of course, conservative idiots will take that, pandemic response team that Obama made and say, see, it was planned. They planned to give us the pandemic, if you will.
Buddy, your grant's not to study a pan-coronavirus antiviral. It's not to study an antiviral for influenza. It's to develop an antiviral for this COVID-19, which is now a common cold respiratory virus that will
I don't think it's now just yet a common cold respiratory virus there, you wacko.
forever circulate. So I think this should be defunded. And I think it should say,
And that's about, this person thinks that COVID, again, is just the cold. What the liars were saying back during 2020, that it's just a cold. And he's responsible for helping to make these decisions. Under RFK Jr., the vaccine denier, the vaccine hesitancy king, if you will. That's why I say in the image for this video that more people are going to die because of policies from this administration and these people in this administration. It looks like you just took an edible.
send a message. We overfunded COVID-19 science. A lot of it came way too late, and now we're defunding it. So again, the media narrative.
I think a lot of their defunding is overreactions as well. Like they think that something is terrible and then they just chop everything and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Are there things that we should stop paying for as a government? Sure. I'm sure there are plenty of things. Like, tanks and planes for the military when the military doesn't want those tanks and planes, but they're being purchased by the government to pay back the military-industrial complex campaign contributors. Those are things that we should stop producing. But that doesn't mean that all cuts are good and many cuts are bad.
Most of these NIH grants need to be cut. Anytime you quote anyone who's
Most of these grants need to be cut. Most grants overall, I find that highly unlikely.
says, my grant is cut, what about my career? Pull the grant, read the grant. Every time I'm reading it, I'm like, this is a bad grant. Should never have been funded in the first.
Because this guy thinks it's a bad grant is not a reason why it's a bad grant. Again, he needs to establish why it is a bad grant, not just because he says so or because his compadres over at FDA or NIH or whatever say so.
First place. And what am I to think when you get a Democrat in office and they
Bold of you to think that you actually think.
fund anything with a diversity and an equity in it, and then you get a Republican in office and they cut the funding? Why is the Republican the bad guy? The Democrat was just funding the sort of the stuff that supports their base, and now the Republican is just unfunded. It's the nature of politics.
At least he's honest about that. At least he is honest about the fact that, the people who are not benefiting from DEI are in the base, which is just him admitting that his party is for a bunch of white people, even though white women do benefit from DEI. And I think they're quickly finding out why they're screwing up by supporting these anti-DEI initiatives when women all of a sudden get cut and they're like, oh, I didn't mean for my job to get cut. Well, too bad. F around, find out.
If we're going to have science be funded by political fad cycles, which I disagree with, I think it should be neutral, which means you would
No, you don't. You don't believe it should be neutral. If you believed it would be neutral, you should say, if we do DEI research, we should do DEI research that includes, both sides of the spectrum or whatever. If you believe that that's the case, then you would not say we need to cut these funds. You would say we need to maybe change and make sure that all sides are looked at. I'm not saying that's my opinion about it, but you would at least be wanting to say that we should be including the other viewpoints. You wouldn't want to just throw the baby out with the bathwater again, but that's what they do, even though they claim to be pro-life.
never funded the diversity work in the first place, and you would never need to cancel it in the second place. Science should be
Well, if you weren't a bunch of racist asshats, if we weren't founded by a bunch of racists that kept slavery around, counted black people as 3/5 of a person, that kept slavery around, and we actually fought a war as to whether or not we should be able to keep people as slavery, and then had Jim Crow, and then had redlining, and then had the bombing of Black Wall Street, then all the other ways in which we as a society have marginalized and oppressed black people in this country. If we didn't have all that, then maybe we wouldn't need DEI education either, because we would have, over the course of the country, treated all people like they were the same, and then we wouldn't have to deal with this. But that's not how we were founded. We were founded as a racist country. We were founded as a country with racist policies that treated black people as not even people, 3/5 of a person. So yeah, that's why we need research into how to help rectify these situations. And how to help rectify these situations means you have to first understand how to and recognize how these situations come to be, which is why you need CRT, which is why you need DEI, which is why you need to have research in these things so we can get a better understanding so we can fix the problems. Because one day, maybe in the ideal world, we'll be able to have a situation where we don't need any such programs because we really will be truly enlightened about what's going on and, treating all people equally. But we're not there yet.
Funded based on, this is another key point. I saw someone say that we're defunding some projects in pancreas cancer, but pancreas cancer kills a lot of people, so we should fund it. This is a common fallacy. Funding should not be proportionate to how common something is or how bad it is. Those things are important factors, but there's one thing that is the final most important factor, which is each dollar you spend should have the greatest return in life years possible. Now, it's plausible.
So, at least he didn't say he should have a return on investment when it comes to money. At least he didn't say that for this particular thing. So, we shouldn't have to restrict. Here's the thing. When you're cutting all this stuff, yes, you then have to pick and choose which research you want to do. But if you had a broad and, funding for many research projects, you wouldn't have to pick and choose which ones you want to leave out and say, oh, well, we're not going to do the pancreas research because it doesn't get the most human live years saved per dollar spent. Like, how do you qualify the value of a human life? But that's what they do. I mean, look at the frickin', the way they treated humans, people, back in slavery. Humans are a commodity to be bought and sold to them. But that's how these people think. You have to justify it by some money spent per live. Well, how do you square that circle? How do you make that determination? How do you determine, the pancreas cancer isn't going to have the best results, so we're going to nix that for this other research. But we can spend all this money to refurbish Donald Trump's plane. I think, if I had to pick between refurbishing a plane and pancreatic cancer research, I'd pick the latter. But that's just me. I'm sure this person has no problem. And he's more than welcome to correct me if he's wrong. I will correct the record. I'm sure he has no problem with Donald Trump's little air palace.
The things that are more dire and that are very common, if you can cure them, you're going to save more lives.
But you just said to not look at things as to whether or not they're more dire. Again, he doesn't even know what he's talking about. He can't even remain consistent over the course of 2 minutes.
But the other thing that's included in science funding is promise. If what you're funding is incredibly low promise, then it doesn't matter how common or how dire it is, because there's low.
How do you know if it's low promise if you don't study it?
Promise. Meanwhile, if something is rare and maybe medium lethality, but the promise for cure is so high, that's the priority. We should fund based on expected life years gained, not the disability life years lost from a disease. It's just a classic
What?
fallacy. And if you think about it more, it is treating to the...
Thinking about it more, again, you're not thinking. You're just regurgitating BS and propaganda from an administration that rejects science.
Absolute risk reduction, my medicine colleagues will understand what I mean. It's treating to the absolute risk reduction, not the baseline risk, okay? It's a classic logical principle. You treat to the expected gain. And so,
treating to the expected gain is different from actually researching based off to determine whether or not you can have expected gain or not. You can't have expected gain. You can't know what the expected gain is going to be until you do the research. But he's putting the cart before the horse. Anyway, I think this all shows why we shouldn't be listening to this fool, this clown, when it comes to vaccines. But these decisions that are being made by these people are going to put more people at risk. What do you think? Agree, disagree? Leave your comments down below. Remember to like the video, share, subscribe to the channel. And unless you're a COVID-denying whack job, have a good day.